Hello and welcome. If you're watching us, you have made one of the best decisions that you can make towards your future, so well done. Now, a little bit about ourselves. Why are we doing this? This is Miss Hendicott. I'm Miss Akoslan, or Miss A, easier to say. And both of us are teachers. Both of us are tutors. We've been teachers, so between us, we've been teachers for over 20 years. And the reason we decided to do this is because both of us have worked in many schools, and we've seen how some schools, the behaviour, more so as time is going on, is getting quite disruptive in the classroom. And there's always maybe 3-4 kids in a class that are dedicated to their work, trying to learn, but actually the chaos around them is making that quite difficult. So, and also too, tutoring. Not everybody's parents can afford a tutor. So, why should some be able to achieve just because their parents have got more money than others? So with regards schools, disruptive behaviour that is sort of becoming more prevalent in schools, and financially children who can't afford to have one-to-one tutoring, Miss Hendicott and I thought, well, why don't we plug this gap and bring to you everything that you would get from a one-to-one tutor and everything that you perhaps can't actually access from your teachers at school.
And we've got the uniform.
Yes, so we might surprise you with each episode.
Each week we might have something different. So make sure that you tune in, even if it's just for the outfits, because we're trying to be as visual and engaging as we possibly can, because we want to make English fun. Learning about new things, especially Shakespeare, who is one of our favourites, of course, is very, very important, but it's also fascinating. I mean, just from what we've learnt ourselves recently, going a little bit deeper into the context of Macbeth, has been intriguing.
I think also because actually, if you don't start with context, if you don't start with why a writer writes and the influences that the writer has had around them, then actually what's the point in studying the text, the play, the novel at all? So actually we're going to start in this session talking about the context behind Shakespeare's Macbeth, because actually it opens up so many more avenues, questions and answers, that if you then put that into your GCSE, you are going to actually stretch your grade from a 6 to a 9 in no time. So we're addressing today context of Macbeth, and that is AO3.
It is.
In the mark scheme. Now AO3 is context, and it is about 7% of your marks. Now you might not think that's very much, but that's a difference between a whole grade, if not 2. So it's important, I think, to actually know everything you can about context, because then when you're studying language, entrance and exits and structure, you can bring in context throughout every single area that you're answering.
I think it's really important to know about the context too, because you can't take a text outside of its time period and try and understand it always in modern terms. Also, as you know, as you're probably aware if you've been studying Macbeth, is he uses the most amazing metaphors and imagery. But a lot of his imagery and his metaphors are actually based on the things around him. Okay,
at the time.
The symbolism of his time, and the Jacobeans loved symbolism. If you just go into one of the galleries and look at some of the paintings, the artworks of the time, even artworks of Queen Elizabeth, there's loads of symbolism even painted into her garments. So to understand why he's saying a certain thing, you've got to understand where he's coming from. He was educated in a grammar school. Is that right? It was a grammar school, wasn't it? It was a grammar school. And at that time, when you went to have an education as a young man, you would be learning Latin. You'd be learning about the Greeks and the Romans.
Yeah, there's a lot.
Especially because this was the Renaissance. This was the time of the Renaissance. It was about looking to the past and finding out information, digging up things that the medieval period had kind of put in a grave. And now all of this was surfacing, things like mathematics and science and art and the body, course, the human body.
Running through all of that was religion.
Yes, because religion was very important, but the focus had moved from the priests and the church alone to a kind of humanism, which basically means that the focus turns into our own relationship with God or a deity, and I think that was influenced by some of the Greek philosophies that they were reading at the time.
Yeah, Shakespeare was heavily influenced by the Greeks and the Romans. However, with Macbeth, we see, unlike some of his other tragedies and comedies and historical plays, Macbeth is actually based within England. It's based in Scotland, as you know, and actually it's based on a real king, two real kings, Duncan and Macbeth. Mm-hmm. Duncan actually, so we're going back to 11 AD.
The Dark Ages.
The Dark Ages, where there was a King Duncan and there was a Macbeth, and Macbeth did kill Duncan.
He did.
But unlike the play, he didn't do it secretly. He did it on the battlefield.
Yes.
And then did become king. Macbeth did become king, and actually he ruled, unlike the play where he was just king for 1 year, he ruled for 17 years, and he was actually a very good king, and he brought Christianity and he brought peace to much of Scotland. Banquo.
Banquo was actually the baddie. He was kind of the villain. He was the one who was
In real life
accused of treason, was it?
Yeah.
And
he helped Macbeth to
he
kill
was
Duncan.
He was an accomplice basically, wasn't he?
Yeah.
And the real Macbeth was actually quite a good king. But you've got to understand a little bit about Shakespeare's relationship to King James, because King James is actually a descendant of Banquo.
Which
so you
blows
don't
my
want
mind.
to upset King James,
who's watching the play.
Who loves theatre, but also loves witchcraft. We'll get to that in a moment. And basically, you've got this king that you want to impress, and he's related to Banquo. So now Banquo, cat. Which one's this?
Stanley.
Stanley
Likes Shakespeare too.
Stanley loves that. Stanley Shakespeare. You should have called him Shakespeare.
No, I like Stanley. Anyway, Banquo. Banquo was a baddie, but he couldn't be portrayed by Shakespeare in the play as a baddie, because otherwise it would call into question James I's legitimacy as king.
Exactly. And in fact, that whole scene of the apparitions with those kings following one after each other, that apparition, is all about, oh yes, James, look at you and your wonderful lineage of kings. You definitely deserve to wear the crown.
Yeah. So he had to portray Banquo in the play as a good guy.
Yep. And the real Macbeth, in fact, there's not much on Lady Macbeth, I don't think, historically. So much of her character, I think, is a construct.
Yeah, it's made up.
So he's developed this character, this very wicked queen.
Also focusing a lot on women's roles within Jacobean society, which, as we know, they weren't very powerful people, women, of course, as we're not now, really, are we? But anyway, that's another conversation for another time.
Yes. What is it? Me Too.
Hashtag.
Yeah, hashtag. We're not going to go on to...
Anyway, so, we digress. Lady Macbeth's character, Shakespeare built a really powerful woman within this play.
He did.
Why did he do that? Because that was so incongruous, another bit of vocab for you there, incongruous with what was happening in society at the time. So then we think, was Shakespeare advocating for women to have more power? Then, as the play progresses, she goes mad and kills herself.
Yep.
So therefore, is actually Shakespeare saying, well, careful, ladies, because if you try and have too much power and boss your husband about, you'll go mad and die.
Yes.
So, again, these are the kind of things that you can bring through in your answers. You posit.
Yes, because you can't really talk about Lady Macbeth without talking about the normal, or the so-called normal role of a Jacobean woman, which would basically be to have children, clean the house, look after the home, and serve her husband. She had to serve her husband. Lady Macbeth is just as ambitious for that crown as Macbeth is.
And she comes to a terrible end.
She does, because women are not meant to be so ambitious.
And also, because of the witches were they weren't entirely female, were they? You could have some male witches.
There's two things people say. Either they're a much older woman, so they're women who've gone through the menopause, and they're basically they've got beards, because some old women, not all old women, hopefully not us, some old women get hairy around the face when they get older.
What does that got to do with anything?
Because basically what they're saying is that these witches were not a gender. And in magic and witchcraft, one of the signs is that you are, in a way, genderless. And that makes you...
Which is what Lady Macbeth asks to become.
Exactly. So when she says, unsex me here, she's actually saying, I want to be as a man. I want to be masculine.
Take away my femininity.
If I have that kind of masculinity, it gives me power. And in a way that's quite sad, because it just shows you how desperate maybe women were to have that power. And in a strange way, it also shows what a great relationship, despite their flaws, Lady Macbeth and Macbeth have, because she has a lot more say in their relationship than probably any other
woman,
king and queen would have had, or a woman and a man would have had at that time period.
But she couldn't then cope with it.
She couldn't cope with it because he's supposed to be the head. When she gets him basically into trouble, coerces him into killing Duncan, then she can't.
Is it her femininity that leads her to feel so guilty? Possibly. And so on? Because he doesn't feel as guilty. You think at the beginning he's the one that will feel guilty, but then once he kills Duncan, he's off. He's ready to kill everybody.
Exactly, and he's like, and the killing starts almost immediately.
Yeah.
He says, you know what? I've killed Sleep. Macbeth has killed Sleep.
I've done it once.
But he's not sorry about killing Duncan.
No.
He's just sorry that his sleep is now going to be disturbed. Yeah. And having sleepless nights is also another sign of demonology. So, of course, we need to speak about King James, don't we?
Going back to King James and witches. So, King James, I found this absolutely fascinating, actually wrote a book called Demonology during the time in which Macbeth is being actually put on stage. And King James, as Miss Hendicott mentioned earlier, was fascinated with witches, not because he liked them, but because he wanted to root them out.
Yes.
And in actual fact, within that period of time that he reigned, Scotland actually killed over 4,000 suspected witches.
Which is again the setting, Scotland. Okay, it was far enough away from England to be a bit scary, to be a Gothic setting.
Mystical,
you know,
sinister.
It's got the mountains, it's got the moors, it's got all these lakes. It still had an air of mystery about it.
And with regards then, Shakespeare wanted to impress James and impress the government and parliament who he would perform the play to first. He obviously wanted to include within the play aspects that James was interested in. So a lot of the actual lines that James had written in Demonology, you will find attributed to a lot of the lines that the witches say.
Yes.
Within the play. Now, if you can bring this into your answer contextually in your exam, you're going to blow the examiner away, quite frankly.
You will, and it is true, and that's why the witches speak in a slightly different rhythm to the other characters. So they don't really speak in iambic pentameter, and they don't speak in prose. They speak in a kind of three, as a kind of three, rhythm of three, and then they've got these oppositions and these antitheses that they speak in. Fair is foul and foul is fair.
They're deliberately creating paradoxes all the time.
And their rhyming couplets make it sound so much more like an actual spell rather than them speaking. So it also suggests to us that they're not entirely human, that there's something inhuman about them.
Lady Macbeth also...
especially when she's going mad.
She speaks in imperatives, though, a lot of the time, which gives her a perhaps you're asking whether she is perhaps a witch as well. So that's a lot of what she says when she's trying to manipulate and overpower Macbeth at the beginning. She can sound a lot like with her imperatives, and you must, very spell-like. She's talking in a spell-like way. So again, is Shakespeare saying a powerful woman is a witch?
And there's that underlying deceit. You know, is she a witch?
Or is she just a really nasty person?
Or is she Catholic? Because there's that whole, the coin and the serpent.
There's so much to talk about.
Be the serpent beneath the flower, and we know that all links to Jesuit deceit.
And also
the fear of Catholicism.
You forgot the gunpowder plot.
Yes.
That also was happening, or just had happened, prior to Macbeth being staged. Now, of course, that was the Catholics trying to overthrow James I and government. Now, they didn't succeed, and James I, to show off and say, oh, you didn't succeed, I'm going to produce a coin, a commemorative coin, and on it was a serpent representing the Catholics trying to overthrow, and then underneath it you have some flowers.
Yes, they kind of look a bit like roses, I think. You can actually find this coin, if you Google it, you can actually find this coin online.
And now you get, and Shakespeare has again trying to impress perhaps James. We can never know for certain. So in your essay answers, always say perhaps.
Yes.
Was
or
he?
Some scholars believe, because even the historians that are researching this context, they've got lots of different sources that they're looking at, and they're trying to put a best picture across.
We can never know for certain.
We can never know for certain, and we don't have loads of literature on all of this. We've got a few texts here and there, and then they make associations.
But we don't have Shakespeare to ask him.
But we don't.
So in your answers, never be, he did it because of this. He put the serpent in and he put lines in from the book because of this. No, you say perhaps he did.
Yes. So you would say something like, perhaps he was making a reference to the gunpowder plot, or the fear of Catholics and the Jesuits, who the Protestants had a big fear were going to try and take over the crown again. And of course King James had that fear, and he was always trying to look like he wasn't Catholic because his mother was Catholic. So he had to put on a great pretense about, he definitely wasn't Catholic. And there's some stuff about Shakespeare.
Potentially,
isn't he?
There is an argument that was actually Shakespeare Catholic himself. Now, if that was the case, and he wanted to impress James I, or literally keep his head, there's no way that he could have allowed James I to know that that was the case. Now, we don't know. His father was Catholic. I think history does tell us that. His father was Catholic.
The baptism certificates.
So in that sense, that's close enough to potentially be dangerous for Shakespeare. So was he, within his plays, showing them to James I, constantly trying to appease James and say, look, by putting the serpent in, by putting lines about the serpent and the flowers, that I support you, James. Absolutely, the Catholics are absolutely terrible. Yes, I agree, down with the Catholics. But was it just because he was trying to get himself out of trouble? Again, you can posit, another bit of vocab there, put forward the rhetorical question that, you are taking into account these things, which is also the impetus for a lot of Shakespeare's writing.
Right, let's go straight into looking at an exam type question. How does Shakespeare portray the character of Lady Macbeth in the extract? How does he present Lady Macbeth? And how does he present women in the play as a whole? If this was a mid-level answer, you have probably written similar paragraphs yourself. So, Shakespeare doesn't like women. He makes Lady Macbeth partly responsible for killing Duncan. She makes Macbeth feel like a coward if he doesn't do it, saying, "Screw your courage to the sticking place and we will not fail." Lady Macbeth is shown by Shakespeare to be a strong woman. However, in this day, women were supposed to be wives and mothers with no opinion. Now, what is wrong with this response? I mean, it looks accurate, it's pretty clear, but why is it not in that top band? What do you think, Mary?
Well, I think that, first of all, the language is very simple. Shakespeare doesn't like women as well is a generalisation that actually we can't make. You can't put words into Shakespeare's mouth because we don't know what he was thinking. But what we can do is we can offer up suggestions. So instead of saying Shakespeare doesn't like women, we would say something along the lines of Shakespeare presents women like this, and then look at the quote and then go on to talk about it. So what we want to do is look at the next exemplar and look at how we can develop our generalizations into something that sounds more sophisticated and analyzes and posits ideas a little bit further.
Yes, I have to agree with you. And the other thing is, you've got this quote here, but it isn't really explained. There's a tagged on bit of context about women in the day, but again, it's very general. There's nothing specific. There isn't even specific terminology. So when we're looking at vocabulary, I'm not seeing any language vocabulary. I'm not seeing anything that even contextualizes this as Jacobean. So let's have a look at something where it's a little bit more developed.
Right, so taking the question again, how does Shakespeare portray Lady Macbeth in the play, and then how does he portray women as a whole throughout the play? Let's look at something that's edging towards a level 9. Shakespeare presents women in very complex and unusual ways in Macbeth because the Jacobean audience would expect women to be silent, submissive, and obedient to the dominant patriarchy.
Now, there's a lot of big words there, and some of you are probably thinking, oh my God, I've never heard that word before. Or you're thinking, how am I going to remember all this terminology?
Yeah, those words won't come easily to me.
And the key here is when you're studying for this paper or any of your literature papers is write down some of this key terminology, write down the vocabulary. You're not expected to know this just from general knowledge or just from what you've heard. You actually need to learn it just like you would learn quotes. So write down some of these phrases, words like submissive, subservient.
Patriarchy.
Patriarchy is a great word to learn because it's not just in Shakespeare.
No.
Because if you've got Inspector Calls, for example, that same word is going to be useful in the context there again. So what we have here is a point. And I'm sure you're all familiar with the boring old PEE structure, which is a very good starting point. So don't dismiss it, even though you've heard it 100 times. You've got writer's method, you straight in there with Shakespeare Presents, because what we're saying is this is a crafted piece of writing. This is not a story. Lady Macbeth is not a real character. Okay, everything is a construct, and that's what we need to remember. So once we've made our points, we then need to move on to developing this point and obviously getting some evidence for why we've chosen it, or linking it again to the extract that they've given you in your exam.
So, evidence. For instance, his characterisation of Lady Macbeth shows her to be a woman in control with power over her husband. Screw your courage to the sticking place and we'll not fail.
So here you've got, again, straight in with some terminology. A lot of you will just go straight into talking about Lady Macbeth, Lady Macbeth. Remind your examiner that she is in fact a character, and this is characterization. And then, of course, you've brought in the themes. Excellent.
Power.
You're not wasting any part of your answer in the exam. Every word counts. And then, of course, what most of a good argument is going to hinge on is a well-chosen quote.
Your evidence.
And now I think the next important thing is, how do we link the context?
And then so you've made your point, you've given your evidence with your quote. Then to really fix that high level from the examiner, you want to now discuss it, analyse it, put your thoughts into it, kind of show the examiner that you're going to now really think about what motivated Shakespeare in his writing and his characterisation. So we could have something along the lines of, this is not the expected role for a Jacobean wife, and even though her power changes over the course of the play, in the beginning it is her dominant nature that drives Macbeth to commit regicide. Regicide is an act against God and the divine right of kings, and her encouraging such a thing would be both shocking and immoral for Jacobean audiences. Shakespeare presents her as usurping Macbeth's role as head and by criticising his manhood, suggesting he's cowardly. She subverts the dominant patriarchal hegemony.
That's a big word, isn't it, Mary?
That's a ridiculous word, Bianca.
But again, these are students really looking for that level 9.
They're showing off.
They're showing off, okay?
And why not show off?
And it's important to show off because you only get this chance in the exam to show
Once.
off.
Yeah.
But if you don't put the word hegemony in, you're still probably going to get a level 9.
Wrong?
It's probably my accent.
Probably. Let's blame you.
Anyway, moving on. So now you can see the context is weaved in with that quote. They haven't gone, quote, oh, now I need to do language, now I need to do context. they've mentioned the context as they're going. And then what the student has done has looked at language. So looking at Lady Macbeth's language.
In the quotation. So within that quote, do you want to actually pull apart the language that she uses, the vocab that is used? So for example, her language is often presented through imperatives, commands, and dark, violent imagery. She includes herself in his ambition for the crown with the collective pronoun weal, implying that she too seeks power and control. It has been suggested, therefore, that for all her wickedness and manipulation, she is presented as a fourth witch or Jezebel figure in the play who sees Macbeth as a route to the ultimate power position.
So if you remember from what we were talking about earlier, it's important to offer up an argument, to look at different viewpoints, because that's really what you're doing. You're arguing a point about a character or a theme or an idea in the play. So when we're developing an argument, it's important to evaluate. So we've set this up almost as just a little question. So the student might say, for example, so why does Shakespeare present such a strong female character in the opening, only to diminish her authority and role by the end of the play's plot? And I think this is really important because by including plot and looking at both the beginning and ending of the play, you're actually looking at structure and form. So you're thinking about more than just language. You're thinking about when characters are on or off, exits, entrances, when their role is over.
And ultimately,
climax.
Ultimately, purpose. The writer's
Yes.
Purpose, audience, and form.
Exactly. So now the next phase will then be to develop that argument and possibly link it back to context.
So, perhaps he is suggesting that women should know their place in society, or else it will upset not only the family balance, but the entire kingdom. Women like Lady Macbeth are therefore portrayed as a dangerous threat to male power as well as society. They seem to be just as hellish, manipulative, and masculine as witches.
All right, and you can see a kind of personal response here. And for those top bands, examiners really like to see a personal opinion creeping in, you know, where a student's making very intuitive, perceptive comments about a character or a situation.
Personal, you know, your own thoughts, your own ideas coming through. Because what the examiner wants to see is that you've not just regurgitated what a teacher has taught you. You are showing that you are interpreting different ideas and thoughts about why, again, Shakespeare has characterised these people as in the way that he has done.
And it might be an idea at that point to maybe offer an opinion about a modern audience's interpretation, or even your interpretation, or how some of those characters would be interpreted today. So this would be, for example, when you could bring in the feminist perspective or the more modern contemporary look at some of these characters. And we really hope that's helpful.
Absolutely. If you'd like to have any of the information that we have talked about, or any of the slides with the points, evidence, explanation and evaluation, then please click on the website below where you will be able to purchase the study notes. So please visit our website, which we will be updating regularly. And if you'd like to send us any of your own work so that we can actually evaluate it, read it out online, then please do ask us to, and we can mention your name or not.
And we're also hoping to set up a little Instagram with some nuggets, some little nuggets.
Oh,
yes.
Okay,
We're going to be setting up an Instagram with some little nuggets and tips that you can access on your phones, because we know how teenagers are obsessed with their phones. And just
you can have access to us at all times. 24/7.
24/7. We will be there. I'll be there. I'll be there.
You just call out my name, and you know wherever I am, I'll come running.
Sassy tutors. To see you again.